Good morning and good afternoon for people who are watching us from elsewhere. I hope you all have enjoyed the beautiful music by Aswat, which is a local musical cultural a band in San Francisco Bay Area, which was brilliantly selected by one of our organizers, Susan. Thank you, Susan, for such a great selection. I already reading some remarks about how beautiful the music was. So while we are continuing to receive people who are plugging in and joining us, just want to give you a little background of how this event came about. Susan, as I mentioned earlier, is a member of the Jewish Voice for Peace in the Bay Area, who met Mazin in Palestine back in 2010. And in the spring of 2018, went to visit and visited the Palestinian Museum, Natural History, and got to know Mazin better. Also, luckily, we found out through Susan that Mazin is coming to the United States in 2021 and really scheduled some visits, some lectures in the different cities in the United States, like in Indiana, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and of course Bay Area, because we learned that Mazin and his wife has family in the Bay Area, and we'd love to have him here. So we were scheduled and ready to go ahead and then host him in last December. We started the promotion last December of 16, got the flyer going on. We're hoping to have him in person in the Bay Area, but unfortunately, because of the difficulties and the obstacles of the COVID-19 that we have been living with in the last 2 years, we end up doing it in a webinar. So I'm hoping that we will have a very, very successful, as much as we are having him in person. We are really very happy and glad to have Mazin with us today from Palestine. I just have a couple of businesses before I introduce our guest. Mazin will speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All questions are to be put in the Q&A. If you see it in the bottom of the screen right there, you could click on it and then put your own questions, and that will be at the time for the discussion sessions. All questions are to be put in that box so we can manage and really make sure that we don't have duplicate questions the same. The chat function would be used for comments, and hopefully we will post from the monitor chapters. We really appreciate the team who is working on this event, as they will be posting URL links to certain issues either being raised in the discussion, or Mazin would like us to post the link for several reasons. Now, before we will start our program, I wish to acknowledge the land on which we are operating in right now in California, San Francisco Bay Area. People who steward the lands, waterways throughout the many generations through history. These groups include Ohlone, Miwok, and Chochenyo. I am honored and very happy to see Mazin back, although I would be much more happier if I see him in person, but we want to make sure that he's safe in his home with his family, and also able to overcome all the challenges, including COVID-19. This is what it means to be resilient. This is what it means to be determined to voice to really bring us the voice of authentic Palestine to us here in the United States and in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've known Mazin for a long time. Him and I were able to be part of the team who co-founded the USPCN, US Palestinian Community Network, which is the organizations I am representing. And I appreciate the team who is organizing this to help me be part of this team. Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh is a founder and volunteer director of the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Mazin also published over 160 scientific papers, over 30 book chapters, and several books on topics ranging from cultural heritage to human rights, to biodiversity conservation, to cancer. He serves on the board of a number of Palestinian youth and service organizations. You could see his bio and organizations on qumsiyeh.org. We will be posting it later on in the chat if it's not already. He oversees many projects related to sustainability of human and natural communities. He's also a receiver of the Paul K. Fireband Award and the Takrim Award, among many other. We are going to go ahead and then start listening from Mazin directly. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with us from Palestine. Shukran. Faddal, Mazin. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can see my shared screen. I'll put it larger. I will try to be very brief because some of you have heard me before, and and hopefully they want those slides that they have seen before. They can ignore and concentrate on other areas of what I talk about. Just a little bit more about me personally. I'm actually sitting here with Jessie, my wife, and a volunteer. Nelly, who we all three of us have COVID-19, so all three of us are with mild cases. Don't worry, we're quarantined at home. We have other staff at the museum, including the president of the university, also who has COVID. So COVID has been a big issue here. It's been going up in cases dramatically, and the positivity rate here in the tests has been around 35%. So it's been very high, and people are worried. Although you know, it's a minor thing for people who are not vulnerable. I worry not about myself or my wife. I worry more about my 90-year-old mother downstairs, who I haven't seen in 6-7 days because I wanted to stay away from her. Hopefully not infected, not infecting her. Anyways, my own personal life, so that you know, is I worked in the US for a long time. I'm a US citizen. I left the US in 2008. My family is kind of mixed. I was born in this village called Beit Sahur here, the shepherd's field, where the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. My family is mixed religiously, if you want. My father is Greek Orthodox. My father's side of the family is Greek Orthodox. My mother's side is Lutheran. My wife is Chinese American. Our son was born in Texas, so he's actually more of a you know, red-blooded American, as they say, who is not necessarily a believer in any religions or anything. But I have a sister who went to Utah and became a Mormon, and I have distant cousins who converted to Islam and so forth. And we have, you know, we're confused. What can I say? But that is life here, and it's good, I think, to have diversity. And if there is a message I would like to deliver today in this talk, it is the importance of diversity. My major advisor in Texas used to tell me, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and at the end, tell them what you just told them. So I'll tell you the bottom line message, and that way you can, those of you who have to run off can run off. The bottom line message is that diversity is strength, whether in human societies or in nature. And it is important to protect diversity. Hence the institute that we founded, called Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, is concerned about sustainability of human and natural communities, diversity in nature and society. That's my bottom line message, if you want. Now, to speak about the situation here, and where is here, we are like at the crossroads of continents. It's a bottleneck, actually, where humans first migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world, and even birds migrate back and forth between Eurasia and Africa through Palestine. This was, a geographic, geologic, and historical accident, if you want. But it was lucky for us because that's also where humans, having this fertile area, developed the first agriculture, the first domestication of plants and animals happened in this area, in the Fertile Crescent, which includes Palestine and the rest of the Eastern Mediterranean region. The people here, our people, are Canaanites by genetics, background, every aspect. Of course, they acquired different religions over time. But once they invented agriculture about 12,000 years ago, they had time on their hands, so they invented other things like the alphabet that you use today, the ABC, and the Arabic alphabet and Hebrew alphabet all come from the same Aramaic alphabet, which is the alphabet of our ancestors. People continued to live and prosper off of agriculture for thousands of years. And not just agriculture, of course, domesticated animals like shepherding, goats and sheep and things like that. But as they tried to survive on this land, only recently have we had dislocation of the native indigenous people from their lands. There was never really ethnic cleansing before the major ethnic cleansing of the 20th century here in Palestine. Ethnic cleansing on a large scale, I'm talking about, where people are, whole villages, complete villages are removed. Before 1948, 70% of the people lived off of subsistence agriculture. And today, about less than 7% of the Palestinian natives live off of agriculture. As you know, this was due to something called Zionism and the idea of creating a Jewish state in Palestine, which entailed the removal of those villages. All the ones in the red dots you see on the map on the right were destroyed and the people ethnically cleansed. And you can read more about that in Ilan Pape's book or other books. But roughly 8 million out of 14 million Palestinians are refugees or displaced people. And the remaining Palestinians are being squeezed into smaller and smaller enclaves, which is similar to what happened to Native Americans in the US. And actually the shrinking map of Palestine that my son drew in 1998 was the first drawing of such a map, was inspired by the map on the bottom, which is the shrinking map of the US that he saw in one of the textbooks when he was doing a home assignment in middle school in North Carolina. Today, the Palestinians are squeezed into 8.3% of the land in essentially an apartheid system. It's actually worse than apartheid in South Africa because in South Africa was 11.5% of the land that was relegated to the blacks in South Africa. But that was a fixed situation in South Africa for many years. In Palestine, it's never fixed. It continues to shrink. And in fact, as we speak, Israel is demolishing homes in the Negev and wanting to concentrate the Bedouins of the Negev into very few communities out of like 44 communities. I want to get them down to 4 or something like that. The original plan to do this was actually ironically called the plan to concentrate the Bedouins of the Negev or concentration areas of the Bedouin of the Negev. And then I guess somebody pointed out that this was not a good terminology to use, so they stopped using it. But this is what they call settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is, of course, impacts the environment. We know about the killing of 2 million buffaloes in North America, for example, etc. And I don't want to talk too much about the symptomology of settler colonialism. You know it very well and very familiar with it, I'm sure. The scenarios for settler colonialism, prognosis, if you want, if we use a medical terminology, since I'm a medical geneticist, the scenarios for colonialism are really one of three possible outcomes for this patient. Either an Algerian model, a genocide model like happened in Australia and the US, or a coexistence model as happened in most of the world, including South America, Central America, Mexico, Canada, etc., Pacific and Atlantic Islands, Southeast Asia, etc. Now, what I do want to talk about, if I am going to talk a little bit about symptomology, I want to talk about symptomology relevant to the environmental issues. And as you know, we humans face major environmental threats. The UN identified 5 major threats: climate change, over-exploitation, habitat destruction, pollution, and invasive species. We can add to them a 6th one, which is settler colonialism. But in any case, these threats to the environment have been going on for a while, from the Industrial Revolution, if you want, and the beginning of the European colonization in the 19th century, etc., or earlier than that. But what it entails is destruction, which you are very familiar with. I won't waste your time telling you all the ramifications of this to each one of us that we are trying to live with. Now, what are more peculiarities related to our own situation? One is when I mentioned that Israel destroyed these Palestinian villages and towns, on many of the places they destroyed, they, of course, not only uprooted the houses of the villages, but they uprooted all the trees of the villages, including the native trees and the planted trees, native trees like oaks and carobs, and planted trees like olives and figs and almonds and stuff like that, essentially destroying the habitats around the villages from a forest or wooded areas that are more diverse. And instead of that, they bulldozed them and they planted later in the 1950s, they planted pine trees. And pine trees are used as a cover for these villages to make sure that they don't show. Ironically, of course, pine trees, uniform monoculture, very bad for the environment, also susceptible to fires. Just this past summer, for example, you can see here a fire in West Jerusalem area of what was essentially Palestinian villages that was completely demolished. And when the fire happened, it actually exposed the terraces that the Palestinians have built over thousands of years in that area when all the pine trees were burned there. Another aspect of colonialism is diversion of water and use of water. So water of the Jordan Valley was stolen basically and diverted from headwaters of Lake Tiberias to the west, result in desertification of the area. The draining of the wetland of the Hula area, which resulted in loss of many species of animals that lived there, and of course also the humans that lived there. Palestinians around the Lake Hula were all ethnically cleansed. There was not a single village left around Lake Hula or Lake Tiberias. Colonial systems also extract resources like water, for example, directly from the aquifers, and you can see the distribution of water for Palestinians is below what the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living. And Israeli Jewish colonial settlers, they get many times fold what we get of water. Israel also is blockading Gaza, not because of Hamas, but because of the gas fields off of Gaza, which Israel is now exploiting and using for its own benefit, economic benefit. There are other areas like, at the local sphere, you can see, for example, Jabal Abu Ghneim just behind me, actually, which was destroyed and Jewish-only colony was built in the place of the forested area starting in 1997. There's also Israeli industrial settlements that impact our environment. They built their worst settlements, like worst industrial settlements and industries next to Palestinian villages and towns. This includes military industries, leather industries, plastics, and others. And these cause DNA damage and chromosome breaks in the local population, as demonstrated by a number of studies, some by my students like Khulud Hamad and others. I don't want to, so I can talk forever about the environmental damage, but you also wanted me to talk about actions and what can be done and so forth. And it is challenging, of course. What we are doing is trying to go against the flow, if you want, or against the power structures in systems that are designed to make people less caring and less interested in the welfare of other human beings. So, our solutions locally, Palestinian solutions, in my humble opinion, must start with three things: research, education, conservation. Before we even talk about reclamation and recreating and stuff like that. Why do we need the research? Of course, because research is essential to do the other things like education, conservation, reclamation, etc. It's essential to do these things via also focusing, as I said earlier, changing the structure of the ego and greed and control and domination model to a model of unity, a model of joint struggle, regardless of background, religion, etc., to achieve what was the lofty 17 goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And there are a number of organizations here that work on issues like research, education, conservation, etc. I wanted to highlight our own institution because we combine all of these things in one place. Our place is basically about 3.5 acres land in which we have botanical garden, we have greenhouses, we have a building with a museum of natural history, we have here you can see some pictures. We have an ethnography exhibit. We work with children. We work with climate change, education components. For example, doing these posters that are culturally sensitive or even animated videos that we produced recently about climate change and biodiversity loss. We work with people of all backgrounds, of all religions, of all ethnicities, if you want. We work with farmers also, and you can see, for example, here's Summer from our institute working with a Palestinian woman farmers to enhance production, and we showed that we indeed could enhance production up by 40% over a period of 2.5 years. The museum provides, or the institute provides a role model and an educational module. So when people come, they can see some things like aquaponics. We actually, in 2016, we brought people from Gaza and showed them how to build these aquaponic systems that grow fish and vegetables at the same time. We have a community garden, you see at the bottom right-hand corner, where children even can plant. We work with women cooperatives to try and enhance production and marketing their products. These are just some pictures of the children, you know, they enjoy themselves even with summer camps, etc. We believe in creating an environment where children learn, not teach them per se, because there's a Chinese saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we want them to do things by hand, as you see. With women, we also have activities like using natural products, plants, etc., to produce household products. We have an animal rehabilitation unit, which helps our fellow creatures on this earth. Our staff and people here enjoy working in modern facilities. We have state-of-the-art molecular facilities, herbarium, library, and taxonomy facilities, etc. We have done partnership with many organizations around the world and locally, including National Geographic Society gave us some funding, the first and last one, I think, for Palestine. The EU and many other organizations supported our work, but the work actually started first 2 or 3 years strictly with local funds, local support. My wife and I actually donated $250,000 to start the project. So we wanted to be independent of the diktats of Western funders, if you want. But we now get Western funders actually come to us rather than going to them. The Belgian government, for example, gave us 3 grants already, and they just came to me for a 4th one they want to give us. We have an institute or a network that we call Palestine Action for the Planet. And we work with the Environment Quality Authority and many NGOs locally that work on the environmental issues. For example, now we are developing the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. It's an amazing that they trusted us to lead this effort to do a national biodiversity strategy. This is very, very important because it'll determine where we go to 2050, you know, and for the next 30 years or so. So it's really important, and we welcome you if you want to come and volunteer with us and work with us. As I said, we work with many organizations, many universities, many institutions here, local authorities and national authorities on various areas, and we have a good team, all young people, except me and Jesse. So you're welcome to come, and we welcome volunteers from age 5 to 95. Some volunteers do very well, like Julius from Germany. He did a paper on orchids, and now he's doing thesis on orchids and doing more work on orchid conservation. Here's some volunteers enjoying doing things like making apricot pickle or fixing garden. Here's some on the upper right-hand corner who built the biogas unit at the museum, which can provide us with better energy, environmentally friendly. They can eat, they can work in the garden, etc. We have big ambitions, and we just got some money for renovation of the North Building to make a bigger museum, and then hopefully we'll get some money for green buildings. This is under snow. The symbol of the museum is the Palestine sunbird, which is the national bird of Palestine. The website is palestinenature.org, as I would love for people to network with us. And I'll also leave, if you want to email us, you can email us at info@palestinenature.org. I'll also leave my personal email in the chat room for us to communicate. Now, I know this was a whirlwind kind of quick overview, but I wanted to leave plenty of time so that we can talk about the issues that you are interested in, and we are, any subject is, of course, you're welcome to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for such a rich presentation, Mazin. We will be going on with the questions that we have. We have had some questions in the chat that we are going to be handling, and I'm just waiting for the team to give me some summary of the questions. One of which was some teachers and academics who wants the recording of this, and I'm assuming that this is okay with you.
Say that again, sorry.
Recording of your presentation, some scholars,
Yeah, sure.
teachers, okay. So
Sure.
we will be emailing this material to them personally. The question I have is first, did the Oslo Accord of 1993 provide for the recognition of Palestinians and Israeli water rights? If so, is the accord being complied with? That's a big question. And then it's related to that, is the severe water shortage in Palestine due to Israeli government policies? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thanks for those two questions, very relevant ones. The Oslo Accords, for those of you who are not familiar with, were interim accords. They were supposed to last for 5 years, from 1993 to 1998 or 1999, I believe. In those 5 years, there was supposed to be negotiations leading to Palestinian independence or some, final status agreements. But the accords kind of created a framework for interim arrangements, as they called them. The arrangements, what were they? Basically, the arrangements were continued Israeli colonization and actually intensified colonization activities. For example, let's take the water. Water was supposed to be a final status issue to be negotiated during those 5 years. In the interim, the Palestinians were supposed to be provided with some water, which is their water that's being stolen from them, basically. When they came to negotiate the water issues and the water track, so to speak, there were some Israeli water experts and lawyers. On the Palestinian side, mostly politicians. I think there was one water person. Anyways, when they started to talk about Palestinians, since the question relates to water rights, the Palestinians started talking about water rights. What's our water rights as Palestinians? Immediately, the Israeli lead of the delegation raised his hand, objected, and said, we need to stop because we are supposed to be discussing water issues, but not rights. We can talk about Palestinian water needs, but we can never talk about Palestinian water rights. Now, this story told to me by one of the people who was at the negotiations, says a lot, because it says, and it's logical to understand why it is so. I mean, colonizers, if they accept native rights to even one spring of water, then of course that nullifies the whole idea of colonization, undermines the whole project of colonization. Because if they recognize Palestinian rights to a spring of water in Jericho, what's the difference between that and all the other springs that they stole? So they cannot talk about Palestinian water rights, is the bottom line. And so it remains how much water we can give the Palestinians so that they can just drink, basically. So the bottom line, of course, who has the guns, who has the power? And Israel has the power. So Israel determines what happens to water. So 90-some%, 94% by last count, of the water of the West Bank is under direct Israeli control. And and that's just the West Bank, which is presumably going to be the Palestinian state. Forget about the water inside the 1948 areas. Gaza water is even worse than the West Bank, by the way, because Gaza has very limited water supplies to begin with in the coastal water aquifer, which has been depleted because Israel has actually blocked off the water of the Wadi Gaza from flowing into Gaza. So the water gets lower and lower in the aquifer. And also Gaza is 2.1 or 2.2 million Palestinians. Most of them are refugees who shouldn't be there to begin with. It's a semi-arid strip of land that's being essentially an open air prison for the refugees. So the answer to Frank's question about is it due to Israeli government policy? Yes. And Israeli government is very proud of that and actually writes these policies on paper. And there are document after document that in which how they allocate natural resources and how they steal natural resources of the land in their favor. This is raison d'etre, as you say, of colonization, is to create a land without a people for a people without a land. So you deprive the native people of their natural resources, like you killed the buffaloes so that they don't have food.
Okay. One related question. Thank you, Mazin. Appreciate that. One related question is it true that sewage and other wastewater from settlement often drain into Palestinian villages and lands?
In many places it does. Settlements in the West Bank, essentially the vast majority of them, like 95% of them or more, were not started directly by the Israeli government. They were started by individuals, settlement companies and settler groups, and like the old Wild West, people go and set up a community, and they set up a community on stolen land. And then the Israeli government comes much later and provides facilities, including sewage and electricity and roads and so forth. But that takes a while sometimes because of all the bureaucracies of governments that exist in every government, including in Israel. So yes, so they end up dumping their sewage on the Palestinians in many cases. Okay. Have sewage treatment facilities. They sometimes divert it to communities like in Wadi Fukin, for example, where it is intentional to damage the life of the local people. Again, part of a meticulous policy to drive Palestinians out.
Yeah. So related the question on the situation of Gaza, the one about if is over 95% of the household water in Gaza non-potable due to Gaza's collapsing infrastructure? Because right now, I mean, all Zionists and US backers, they're talking about blaming Hamas on this thing, the infrastructure of the local government. Is that true? I mean, how we could talk about this? Is this crisis exacerbated by Israeli blockade? And is it apparently, like you said, is it responsible for creating such a situation?
I mean, everywhere where there are Palestinians, their infrastructure is not allowed to develop and not allowed to. So Israel prohibits even the electricity generators in Gaza from being repaired or provided with fuel for electricity. And of course, you cannot operate sewage treatment facilities without electricity. In Gaza, electricity is 1 or 2 hours a day at best. And so Gaza ends up, of course, not having this ability to do sewage treatment. because of Israeli restrictions, they end up letting the sewage go into the Mediterranean Sea. And ironically, because of the water currents coming from the Suez Canal and up north, the sewage of Gaza ends up drifting north to Jaffa and Tel Aviv, and Israelis end up swimming in the shit of Gaza because their government wants to destroy life for the Palestinian. If you want a good book on Gaza and the Israeli policies in Gaza, I recommend Sarah Roy, who's a Jewish professor of economics at Harvard University, who wrote a book about de-development in Gaza and how Israel intentionally de-develops Gaza. But if you think it has to do with Hamas, if that is somehow the propaganda that infiltrates to us, then you need to explain why places like inside Jerusalem, like Shafat refugee camps, doesn't have infrastructure. These are areas annexed to Israel. Jerusalem was annexed to Israel. Jerusalem is occupied by Israel. Jerusalem is not Hamas. Why is the Palestinian communities in Jerusalem, like Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, all these neighborhoods, Beit Hanina, etc., are deprived of basic services, whereas the Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem, even the illegal Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, like the settlement I showed you, Har Homa, that's behind me, why are those provided with services and facilities, whereas the Palestinians, who are under direct Israeli control, don't have services? The answer is very obvious. It has nothing to do with Hamas or anything else. It has everything to do with a system of apartheid, which has two sets of laws, one for Jews and one for non-Jews. Non-Jews are not wanted. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to report to you, we have almost 30 questions, and I think we may want to hold on receiving more questions because we want to make sure we have enough time. I don't know when we are going to end. Maybe my comrades and the organizers of this event, we want to make sure that it is effective, and also it's really exciting to hear all these dynamics, all these questions that's taken place. So
try to be brief in my answers and go
to say it briefly. Okay, all right. So I have a question from Hassan. Would say, have you personally or have the institution that you belong to have been directly targeted by the Israelis? When and how?
All Palestinian communities here are targeted in one way or another at different levels. Of course, I have not been targeted in the same way, for example, as 7 human rights organizations which were shut down, some dealing like Defense of Children International is dealing with defense of children, or the Palestinian Women Workers Committees, or the agricultural committees, who were shut down and labeled as quote unquote terrorist organizations, even though the EU and the funders and everybody who looked into it said Israel has no shred of evidence. And even when Israel itself tried to produce evidence to explain to the Europeans and the Americans, they couldn't come up with anything on them to show that any of their members are associated with terrorism or anything like that. So certainly, compared to those, we are very safe. I am part of Bethlehem University, of course, which is a Catholic university. So that provides some shield, that doesn't mean very much. But there are attempts, of course, to hamper our work. We cannot, even volunteers have been turned back at the borders because Israel discovered they were about to volunteer for us doing agricultural work or things like that. Equipment and supplies and even books have been denied to us, etc. I mean, I could go on, but Also, to do my work, I have to have freedom of travel, and we don't have freedom of travel. I cannot even go to Jerusalem, which is just behind me here, just 5 kilometers away. I cannot go to Jerusalem. Even though I have an American passport, I'm not allowed into Jerusalem. So there are all sorts of restrictions and problems, and I don't have too much time to go through all of this.
Okay. Also, and related to that, what was there any collaboration with the people inside the 1948? Do you have or all relationship with institutes similar, focused inside the territories that occupied Israel in 1948?
Well, to be brief, we work with all people who want to work in joint struggle with us. Zohar, who put her email in the chat saying hello from Bethlehem, is an Israeli who's volunteering long-term with us at the Institute. We have, of course, when I was arrested more than a dozen times, half the times I was arrested with Israelis who join us in the struggle to stop the uprooting of 2,000-year-old olive trees or demolishing of homes and things like that. We welcome joint struggle with many institutions inside the Green Line, institutions of human rights work like B'Tselem or the Israel Committee Against Home Demolitions or Breaking the Silence. All these organizations work with us. As far as professional collaborations, of course, we obey the boycott, divestment, and sanctions guidelines, so we cannot collaborate official Israeli universities like Hebrew University or Tel Aviv University, because these institutions are complicit with the occupation and colonization in Palestine. Many times their campuses sit on stolen Palestinian land. So we cannot do it officially with Israeli universities. But as scientists, of course, we use each other's research. I have utmost respect for some scientists, Israeli scientists, and they cite my work and I cite their work in literature, but we cannot collaborate on grants or anything like that, because then they would have to put their institution and I have to put my institution, and we cannot have Bethlehem University and say Hebrew University on the same research paper or anything like that.
Excellent. Thank you. I have a question from Frank about him being witnessed while he was in Palestine, witnessed sewage from Kufr ad-Dum settlement draining into the Bedouin village, Al Khan Al Ahmar, during his visit to the village in 2018. Can you explain this situation so people can know what area that we're talking about?
Yeah, Frank, we talked earlier about this in many areas. This is not just in Khan al-Ahmar area, where settlements sometimes do that. It's not unique to Khan al-Ahmar. Khan al-Ahmar is a particularly interesting area that's located between Jericho and Jerusalem. And Israel wants to ethnically cleanse those Bedouins from that community. This would be the third time that they would ethnically cleanse these people, because they were removed from the Negev in 1948. And so they went to the Jordan Valley. And then 1967, Israel occupied the Jordan Valley and kicked them out of the Jordan Valley up the hill to these semi-desert areas, basically. And now wants to remove them a third time. Again, you know, this is a classic process of ethnic cleansing and removal of the native people to serve the colonial project.
Excellent. We have another question in relation to something that you mentioned. You could, briefly answer it if you want, about the gas fields in Gaza. You mentioned that in your presentation, if it was heard correctly, in relation to the Zionist state's blockade, siege of Gaza. People have never heard of that. So can we elaborate a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, it turns out there are trillions of cubic meters of liquefied gas off the coast of Gaza and the Mediterranean coast in general, including off the coast of Lebanon and, of course, the Palestinian coast that was taken in 1948, like near Haifa and other places. And there is plenty of energy resources here, and Israel, as with the water, it's not that Israel wants a fair share of it. Israel doesn't care about getting a fair share of the water. They want to control the water as political leverage, as economic leverage, as ways to control. So the same thing with the gas fields off the coast of Gaza, who are rightly belong to the people of Gaza. Israel wants to control them so that they don't have any economic power and they cannot build any economic power. They remain basically impoverished and dependent on humanitarian aid.
Okay. So going back to the Israeli government, or particularly settlers, as we see the wave of aggression among the settlers in Hayy al-Sheikh Jarrah or other areas around Jerusalem, does the Israeli government or settlers interfere in any way with your institute? And do some Israelis support it?
Well, I mean, the Israeli settlers are, this is, let's put it this way, the Israeli government is a government of settlers. It's not like there's a distinction between the Israeli government and the settlers. Israel was established as a colonial settler state from the beginning. And so it has, of course, been supportive of settlement activities all along and encouraging them. Sometimes, you know, they do minor adjustments here and there, like they removed the settlers from Gaza and moved them to the West Bank. That kind of adjustments they sometimes do. But the bottom line is Israel as a country wants the land which is between the Mediterranean and the Jordan Valley to be Jewish state, period, end of story. Unlucky for them, there are millions who are not Jewish here and who are not happy about this attempt to remove them from their land. And so that's what do? You know, the settlers do their thing, and settlers in North America did their thing. And of course, the thing they do is known, you know, they want to drive Palestinians out by any means necessary. And if Palestinians try to cultivate their lands, they'll go and burn their olive trees or steal their olives after they get harvested, or burn their houses or destroy their houses or kill, even burn. You know, the other day there was a settler who threw a Molotov cocktail into a family's home and burned, the whole family. Only one child survived, you know. This is what they do. This is, as you would expect, as in, you know, the Dutch in South Africa or the British in the US, the Spaniards in South America with the Aztecs, or any such situation. And of course, you can also, as I said, the symptoms are very clear. You can expect them also to circle the wagons and say we are protecting ourselves from these quote unquote savages, terrorists, barbarians, whatever terminology they use in their particular situation. That's expected and understandable also in the context of colonization. I really don't want us to spend all the time left for us talking about these symptoms of what people do or don't do in these situations, because it's almost classic. You can write the books and just change the locations and the language, and the events would be almost identical. Massacres, no, this, that, resistance of the locals, all of this stuff is very well understood. I'd like to focus on the therapies and on how we move forward to a better future for everybody. and for nature. This is important.
Thank you, Mazin. We noticed in the Q&A box, people are saying, we're putting the questions in order, but also we are some comments about talking about solutions, what we could do, and want to leave that towards the end. But let's do that in an organized manner. Thank you so much for your patience. One question was about how do Palestinians survive when their oil orchard being destroyed, uprooted? What they do after that, and how when the field are being confiscated or the olive trees are being uprooted?
Well, not all orchards are uprooted. Not all olive fields are uprooted. People do what they can to survive even on very limited resources. People are also forced, who were farmers and who owned lands, who now own no land. They're forced to even go and become indentured laborers working for the occupier. There are many Palestinians who unfortunately even work at building walls and building Israeli Jewish settlements because they need a source of income for their families. You cannot, again, make generalizations. Everybody reacts in different ways. How did the Native Americans in Florida react on the issue of the March of Tears, or resisting those dislocations that they encountered? Different people reacted differently. Some resisted, some succumbed to their fate, some were killed, some survived, some, I don't know, different people do different things to survive. But the bottom line is today, between the River Jordan and Mediterranean, there are 6.2 million Palestinians hanging on for sheer life, for thread of life. Straws, we hang on to straws sometimes, and so hope for the best. What is my job? I mean, that's the bottom line. When you ask about what we can do, what is my job? What am I supposed to do? Well, you have to provide hope. You have to provide agriculture. You have to have food sovereignty, for example, is important. Even growing vegetables on ceilings and roofs and walls of refugee camps. Whatever you can do to survive and stay on this land, despite all odds and despite the fact that the US and the Western powers are equally in bed with Zionism and with its genocidal intents for the Palestinians, we're standing not just against Israel, by the way, we're standing also against the US, Britain, France, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. All these countries are stacking up against the local Palestinians. And what do? We give up? No, we have to resist, and we have to keep going, and we have to try, and we have to get Jews and others and everybody to come and join us in the struggle. And they do. And so apartheid in South Africa ended. Apartheid here will end if enough people engage, like with BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. And we should not just keep dwelling on the impossibility of the situation. No, the situation is not impossible. Sorry, there's a lot of hope. If you want, I can talk about hope, but if you want me to keep talking about the problems and the challenges, then we can keep talking forever.
We'll definitely want to talk about hope. We really want to hear about hope a lot and what we can do. Just wanted, for the respect of the people who are participating in on the discussion and the question and answer, we just want to make sure that everybody's concerns being addressed. Now, having said that, we have 2 questions from Martha Lauren, specific questions about what's happening in the village of Al-Walaja. And they were moved in 1948 from Old Walaja to New Walaja. Are there new Israeli settlement in this area? How difficult is it for them to go into Bethlehem? and how do the people of villages survive? That's the first piece of the question. The other one is about another specific about Al Khadr. You know, what's happening in Al Khadr? Are the old stone Palestinian home being destroyed? The questions from Martha Larson. Thank you,
Thank
Martha.
you. Both Al-Walaj and Al-Khadr are dear to my heart. I have many friends there, and I was arrested in Al-Walaj many times for standing up for against the wall and against the destruction of houses, etc. Both places are still under target because they are located in quote-unquote sensitive areas surrounded by Jewish-only settlements, and they remain like these defiant Palestinian towns. So Israel wants to kind of connect the Jewish settlements, and they want to remove these Palestinian towns that have been there even before the state of Israel came here. They want to remove them and make it all blue areas, if you want, as we say. So yeah, the situation continues and the struggle of the people there continue. The water of Al-Walaja is the biggest threat for me, I see, because they took the last major spring of Al-Walaja and included it into like a park and prevented the people of Al-Walaja from getting to it. The same with Al-Khadr, you know, in terms of the trimming of the houses at the edge of Al-Khadr, slowly trimming them so that the settlement can expand.
Thank you. Thank you, Mazin. I wanted to express my appreciation and really great amount of questions, and it really indicates the diversity of our audience and the diversity of interest, and this is make us nothing but stronger. So my upcoming two questions is from a spiritual point of view, and then this is important also to the question from Reverend Dr. Naveen Saras. The two questions are, how does your faith inspire you to care for God's creation? And the other one is, do you work with Talitha Komi School? It concerns about the environment as well.
Yeah, sorry, what was the first one?
The first one is, does your faith inspire you to care for God's creation? Yes.
Well, of course, each of us is driven by their background and their upbringings and their faiths and so forth. For me, for example, you know, while I'm not religious per se, I don't go to church every Sunday or anything like that. The message of Jesus, of course, reverberates with me as the first true resistance to tyranny and oppression, and for which he, of course, was crucified. But this, to me, is, you know, his teachings, especially his Sermon on the Mount. I have it at my desk because it is always inspiring for me, the way he describes the need for us to care for poor people, for people who are suffering, for people in jail, for people who are sick. This is, to me, is very, very important. And so my upbringing and my spirituality is connected to these things. But I have acquired spirituality and faith from many other beliefs, including Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, all of these things, and also, of course, from my science background of biology and natural selection, and how nature operates, and how ecosystems are dependent on each other, and how monoculture or monodiversity or no diversity is not healthy, whether in human societies or natural ecosystems. So all of these things, of course, shape me. Talitha Komi, my uncle actually, Mazin Qumsiyeh, and I were the ones who started the group in Talitha Komi, Lutheran school education about the environment, and the Environment Education Center And the collection that my uncle and I, Uncle Sana Atallah and myself have collected is at Talita Kumi, and we have used it for education there for many years. There has been some changes in that institution and its structure and all of this, but it's one of many. My uncle has died since then, who was head of the Lutheran education component there, but anyways, it has evolved, and it's one of many organizations here that are concerned for the environment. Many schools have environmental clubs and things like that, and we are, as part of our work for the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, we're trying to get all these organizations to work together in a better way.
Okay, thanks, Mazin. I have a couple of questions that are like kind of like in the same field, but one from anonymous attendee and one from Naomi. Are there specific pesticides or agricultural technology that the US export to the Zionist entity that we should study for potential PDS questions, PDS campaign? That's one. Two, has there been health studies highlights the toxicity of the occupation on Palestinian health?
Has there what? What's the last sentence you said?
The last one about the toxicity of the occupation on Palestinian health.
Yeah. In terms of the agricultural connectivity between the US and Israel, it's very limited, actually. And Israel has very little interactions with the American agricultural industries. Of course, they are, like many other countries, are also getting some Monsanto seeds and other things that I consider harmful, actually, for them and for us. But that's a more general issue about agribusiness, if you want, and the way agribusiness is. It's more, the other way around might work better. Is there are a lot of Israeli agricultural products, that are produced on stolen Palestinian lands that are being sold in the US and in European markets that should be targeted for boycotts. Everything from avocados to guavas to figs to dates, things like that. These are, many of them are also produced by indentured Palestinian labor, but they can be targeted much easier, in my opinion, in this fashion. As far as, sorry, now again, this COVID plays with the mind tricks. I'm starting to have short-term loss of memory. What was the second question, Mullah?
You have a great memory. No, it's okay. The second question was about the I put as recorded. So
now I got a paper and a pen, so I'll start taking notes.
If there is the health studies, is there certain studies about the impact of
the toxicity? Now I remember something. But yeah, so yeah, Israel actually exports, for example, pesticides that are very harmful to the environment to Palestinians, even pesticides that they prohibit inside Israel. Inside the Israeli areas, they allow for Palestinians, and that's intentional to cause us poisoning, if you want, and to make money, of course. But that happens, and there are really very strange things. I mentioned about the industrial settlements that they built near Palestinian areas that are more toxic. Sometimes these happen because Israeli companies know they can come to the West Bank and not be subject to environmental regulations inside Israel, which are more stringent, and especially near Israeli Jewish communities, where everybody says, not in my backyard, so to speak.
Okay. All right, we're now moving towards sort of like solutions and ideas and things like that. But I wanted to ask the attendees to maybe give us a chance to answer all the questions that we have before we start posting new questions, because apparently some questions are very, very similar. And I don't think that we want to spend the rest of Saturday with Mazin. Maybe he needs to relax and rest a little bit. So I had a question from Elizabeth Fisher, talked about, have you got the attention of international climate change groups like Climate Reality, for example, Al Gore Group, or Citizens Climate Lobby that might fund or bring attention to your institute and protest the environmental?
Yes, we worked with the global, especially with the global South. You know, there's a huge environmental injustice globally in that the Western countries produce most of the greenhouse emissions, and the developing countries like Africa and the Middle East, Arab world, get the brunt of the effect of climate change. So we were lobbying on these areas, including on COP26. And there was another question in the question and answer part about whether Palestine was represented at Kunming. Yes, we were represented there, not in person, but online. Many countries actually sent delegations online only because of the COVID-19. But we have been lobbying, we have been working hard on this with the Global South. Now, have we done enough? No, I think we need a lot more. Our biggest limitation here is time. And if any of you, by the way, can help us in this regard, for example, you know, you can connect us with Bill Gates Foundation or any others, we need to write to them. I just wrote to the Sierra Club because they were planning to do a trip to Palestine, to Israel, as they say. And we want them not to do this trip, or at least if they do it, they should spend half the time seeing the real situation of the environment, not the greenwashing that Israel is trying to show the Sierra Club and other groups that come here. National Geographic even has trips to Israel, but I think it's all stopped in the past 2 years because of COVID-19. But there is a lot of work to be done, and the environmental issues provide us with great opportunities to reach people who are concerned about the environment and sustainability. But we do need people to help us, need people to connect with us with other people, to leverage us with the UN, with the UNEP, environmental facilities, all these things.
In terms of community participation, and there is one from Amani Ahmed, shukran for being here. And in regards to the community organization, but ways that has the organization been able to implement to serve wide range of areas, villages, given ways where the occupation fracture our community literally and figuratively. Are there satellite programs in different areas for those who are unable to reach your facilities? I mean, apparently when we had the COVID-19, we start, doing this organizing through Zoom and stuff like that. So if there is any ways that we could connect while we're away from each other.
Absolutely. We have done even virtual tours of the museum with links I can send to those of you. By the way, I put my email in the chat room. If anybody contact email list, and we can send you those videos, like videos of virtual tours. But we also have been reaching out through social media and through mainstream media and YouTube and other, making some really, even like I mentioned, the animated videos for children. We even have an application game that youth can download on their on their smartphones and stuff like that and play it that relates to the environment. We also, most recently, and I'm so proud of this project, most recently we commissioned and bought a trailer to make it, we made it a mobile museum. We're going to go with it to the remote communities because I don't expect everybody to be able to afford to come to the museum in terms of travel and things like that. So we have to take the knowledge to them at those locations. Of course, given the restrictions of movements and stuff, we'll just have to work around that. Originally, this trailer was done in cooperation with the Galilee Society, funded by the EU. The Galilee Society, as you know, is in Shafa Amr in the Galilee, Israeli-Palestinian organization. And originally, we were hoping that we could drive this museum all over the country, not just in the West Bank, but Israeli restrictions. I'm still hopeful that maybe I can convince the EU to pressure Israel to allow the trailer to go to the villages in the Negev and the Galilee and other places. But these are some of the ways that we reach the communities through schools. We go to schools regularly. We have done so far maybe over 100 schools all around the West Bank, from Jenin south to Hebron, you know. We haven't been to Gaza, but we did network with groups in Gaza and gave talks to youth in Gaza online, which were very empowering and very, for me, it was quite a boost in the arm that we were able to do these things and continue even despite the blockade to work on environmental issues in Gaza.
Yeah. Thank you, Mazin. That's great to learn about these apps where students can get engaged through their own electronic device, and since they are like, you know, very much attached to that. That's very creative and amazing. Question is about, you know, what strategies that do you think can be used to get the US activists who are like work in the environment, who are like for climate justice, to consider Palestine as part of their struggle, to consider that Palestine is going to be on the agenda as an ongoing item, not, you know, what do you think what strategies do you think can be used in the US to do that?
Well, I mean, people who are environmentally inclined are primed for this. It's really thinking globally and acting locally is the way we all environmentalists do. I am, you know, when the fires in Brazil were raging, and I wrote about this, and I wrote about Bolsonaro and his stupidities, and we started working on this. As environmentalists, we should be concerned globally, what's happening globally. And people already in this field should be or are concerned about this. It's just a matter of sometimes they don't know. They don't know what's going on here because, as you know, the Western media is very much focused on now, for example, what's happening in Ukraine. And they don't care that there's genocide in Yemen that's happening. So they are focused on what Russia wants and what the US wants with NATO. To me, you know, they're not focused on real people's concerns. They're more focused on what's happening at the governmental levels. And I think we need to educate them. So the first step, I think, is education, reaching out. Doing more events like this is important, and doing it at universities, doing it in facilities that work on environmental issues, you know, all the groups that work on the environment in the US. Greenpeace, for example, we should be involving Greenpeace. We should be involving many other, you know, I told you, Palestine Action for the Planet, we started doing some of this, but we need more help. Palestine Action for the Planet is actually also networked with with Extinction Rebellion, and Extinction Rebellion has a presence in the US. We ought to network with all these groups, all these organizations, educate them and work with them on their issues, and they work with us on our issues, because ultimately these are all the same issues.
Yep. Excellent. That's one of the reasons we're having this event. This is amazing discussion. Thank you for this. The next question is specific to Mazin from our friend Janet in San Francisco Bay Area. Do you know Hamza Hamouchini? I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who has done work on green grabbing, green colonialism.
I heard the name, but I don't know him personally.
And it's
Yeah,
about,
there's
he's talking about
greenwashing.
hydrocarbon. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, there is a lot of people that wrote some things and worked on some things, and I'd love to network more with these people. Again, you know, our limited time, if you guys network us or network on behalf of us, and consider yourself, every one of you here attending, there's 110 participants I see, every one of you can consider themselves our ambassador. They can reach out to anybody on our behalf and ask them and network us, and let's do some work together.
Okay. So the next question is like kind of a big picture question, and giving the grim political picture right now, what do you see as the impact of your work for the future of the region, and what is your vision?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, I think we primarily, each of us primarily acts because we want to be able to look ourselves in the mirror in the morning and say, hey, we're trying to do our best. We're trying to change something. We're trying to leave this world a better place than we had it. Well, you know, for me personally, this is an ongoing struggle of determining my priorities and where I go in life, and it hasn't always stayed the same. Of course, I change almost every few years. I change direction. My direction now has focused more on working with children, because children are the future. Adults tend to be a little stubborn and have stuck in their ways. So children are much more creative and open. And so they can create that world that we aspire to, which is a world of sustainability for human and natural communities. So by focusing on children and children education, and I would say also university education, I work with my university students along the same lines. These are the future who will change the world, if you want. It is not a matter of, you know, that I have the illusion that you know, particular groups or organizations, including ours, are critical or you know, whatever. But we collectively make a difference. And I have to go back and look at the U.S., for example, and say, how did the U.S. get all these positive changes in the U.S. over the past 200 years, for example? Civil rights, women's right to vote, 40-hour work week, Social Security, ending the war in Vietnam, ending US support for apartheid in South Africa. How did these things come about? They came about because there was a small group of people. I never have the illusion that they become a majority. A small group of people who decided enough is enough, and they acted. Went out into the streets, they protested, they lobbied, they whatever. And that's how the world changes. The world changes when you have 1% of the population get up and say enough is enough. And so that's what we have to do, I think, in environmental issues or anything else. We're never going to have a majority of people. Most people are unfortunately apathetic, and they will remain apathetic. But we have to have more people who are active. And so I prefer actually to think of it in terms of balance between the 1% who are profiting and the 1% to 2% who cannot sit still and have to get out and do something, like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or Desmond Tutu, or those people who get up and do something. And I think that's how the world changes.
Okay, great. Mazin, I have two questions. I'm going to combine them and ask you about, maybe you will be able to answer them together as we are approaching towards the end of the bulk of the questions. We have like a little bit over 10 questions. So the question is, the first part of the question is, are there any plans for reforesting, regreening in the hillsides to hold more water in the soil? And the other question is, how are you able to get building permits and avoid having your property bulldozed or vandalized?
I mean, let me answer the second one first. Israel bulldozes and destroys, and they continue to do this. They haven't done it to us, as I said, because we're part of Bethlehem University, perhaps, and it's church property, if you want. But they have done it to many institutions that work on issues that are basic human rights or agricultural work. They even stole computers from agricultural work committees or other things. And this is par for the course. You have to expect it, and you have to adapt to it, and you have to set up contingency plans for it. So you set up contingency plans. I have backup systems, for example, for my data, for research data, scientific data that are important, that we don't want someday to find that we lose data that took us years to collect. So there is always some things you can and should be doing to prepare for the worst, but you cannot be driven by fear. And this is important. You cannot just build your life on the issue of Israel has the power and all of that stuff. I wrote actually a chapter about this because I think many Palestinians suffer from an illness that's the illness of mental colonization. Israel has colonized their minds to the point where they are subservient, sort of like the house slaves in the old slavery period. We need to liberate our minds, and that's what Stephen Biko said, the best weapon in the hand of the occupier is the mind of the occupied. And in the civil rights movement, they used to say, free your mind and your ass will follow. So I think we need to not be driven by the fear of the oppressor, which leads me to answer the first question about greening and all of this. Yes, we need, I can't tell you how many times I planted trees that were uprooted by the Israelis, and we replanted. And there are houses that are demolished that we rebuilt. And then they were demolished again, and we rebuilt again. We collected some funds and rebuilt them. There's one village in the Negev, Naqab, called Al-Araqib. It was destroyed 197 times. Imagine, 197 times the Israeli military destroys this village. These are Israeli citizens, by the way. They hold Israeli passports. And every time they rebuild. So we cannot give up. It's an existential struggle. Existential struggles are not like, well, they have the power, I might as well come cut my throat, No, sorry. It's an existential struggle. It means you have to struggle. It doesn't mean some people don't give up. Some people do give up. And God bless their soul. They have limitations. People have limitations. I think there is enough young people who are energized and who are willing to continue planting, continue growing, I can't tell you how many wonderful stories I can share with you about young people here who are going back to the land, who are planting their own vegetables and fruits, organic things in Ramallah. They are even selling them to rich bourgeois Palestinian Authority families, and they are making money and are doing fine. Everybody adapts, everybody tries, and we see.
Okay, well, we are getting very close to the end of our amazing conversation and engagement on this. Before I ask Mazin to give us, a closing remarks, I want to see like there's a last questions that could give us the leeway to end. That Israel is a clear violation of international human rights conventions on all scores. How can we make that? How can we make them accountable, and how we can build a stronger movement to really elevate the level of political awareness around this issue? And I will leave it up to you, and then you could make the closing remarks and
Okay.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm willing to stay a few minutes later and answer some more, but maybe I can also quickly go over some questions that were asked and in the question answer and that are not answered yet.
Okay.
I mean, Brooke, I appreciate this. I think what you can do in the US, since the US is the biggest impediment to peace in the Middle East, if the US wants peace in this country, they could do it within 2 weeks, because Israel is shielded from international law by the use of the US veto, by the fact that the State Department, half their time is spent all around the world, not just in the Middle East, all around Africa, everything else. Half the time of the State Department employees is spent protecting Israel and defending Israel instead of defending the US or US national interests. So what you need to do is work on your government to effect a change in its policies. It's already beginning to happen in Congress with some like the Quads and other progressive candidates in Congress at the state level, and others. Even Huwaida Arraf is now running for Congress, so support her, please. There are many ways you can change the situation in the US. You have a great opportunity. The public in the US is starting to realize there's something wrong when half our national debt is due to wars in the Middle East that Israel pushed us to go in, like Iraq and Afghanistan, and now they're pushing for war on Iran and things like that. So I think our role in the US is very critical. There are, Martha asked about Gandhis, and yes, there are lots of Gandhis in Palestine. I actually wrote in the interlink an article, where is the Gandhi in Palestine? I could send you the article. Again, you can email me, I'm happy to send you these things. James asked about Dawood Nassar. I just talked to him actually. He's in the hospital, he's doing better. The people who attacked him are actually Palestinians, not Israelis. And essentially the Palestinian Authority knows who they are, and hopefully under pressure from us, they will take care of them. Climate change groups like Climate Reality, etc. We talked about that, and I think the others we kind of covered them. What can Israelis do to bring home demolition and settler violence to an end? Get out and join the demonstrators. There are demonstrators in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and South Hebron Hills. Zohar was just at the South Hebron Hills, even in this cold weather. So join the struggle. Basically, Israelis cannot say, well, I'm neutral. You're not neutral, just like the Americans are not neutral because we give Israel billions of dollars of aid. You can't be neutral in a moving train, as Howard Zinn said. So get off the train and start working. That's what I would say. Bottom line, last sentence I would say, I wanted to again remind you what I said in the beginning, that I think human diversity and biodiversity are good things, and they ought to be promoted and supported. And it is not enough for us to complain about bad things that happen. It is not enough for us to have knowledge. We really have to get our act together and do something about this knowledge by acting, because ultimately it's in our interest, it's in the human interest. And we don't want to be like those lemmings that end up off the cliff and everybody's saying, well, everybody is moving in the same direction, might as well keep going, you know? We have to get our act together as a species, not as Israelis or as Palestinians or as Americans, but as humans. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh, for being our guest from Palestine, and we wish you a best and fast recovery. And thank you for each and every one of you who participated with us in a really on a nice Saturday in California. I don't know, wherever you are. Thank you for being with us and engaging in all these questions. Thanks for Jewish Voice for Peace, for for organizing this event, for all the organizations, for all the individuals, for each and everyone who posted about this event. And hopefully you have all the information, all the the necessary information to keep in touch, keep it going, keep the hope high, and then people united will never be defeated. Thank you so much.